Today is solder day, so let's see how we get on. So where I left it, when I had some books whilst this piece of cork was drying off, and I put some blue paper towel down there to stop the books getting damaged from the PVA, which wasn't such a good idea because now I get bits of residue from the blue paper towel, so that wasn't such a wonderful idea. I think the best thing to do is just probably lay a bit of old carrier bag and that kind of thing down, just to stop the PVA sticking to whatever you use to weight it down. And the books I used, I didn't really want damaged. They're sort of quite collectible, those little books. Anyway, so that's down and stuck down. I also put another piece there, and there's another piece just here. I've also just loosely pinned the fast up line, which will come out of the station here. I've obviously trimmed it off short of the edge because I don't want all the joins to be on the edge, otherwise that will give me problems. So that one's in, and running a coach through it, it works quite smoothly. To gauge if the tracks are the right distance apart, I use one of these little Pico 6-way gauge, and the two tabs on the inside are for the Pico streamline spacing. So when I put it across the tracks, you can see then that they're the right kind of distance. And well, here's my new point, and as I pop that one into place, then that's the kind of distance that I want the point to be. Going back to the wide shot again, and here hopefully you can see that gauge fits in there. So those two lines that go straight through the centre, sorry, this line here that goes straight through the centre of the station, and the other fast line that will come down here, will all be parallel and the right distance apart. So now it comes down to fitting this point. So I've continued the curve here from the main line, and if I just pop in that point into those fish plates, that's, nope, not quite in. Yep, it's in both of them now, and that's where the point will sit. Pop in my little gauge, and there we are, good to go. So what I'll do is I shall just pin that a moment just to keep it still. Okay, so that's where we want the point to be, and of course now you're faced with the dilemma of fitting your point motor underneath. Well, there are various options here. You don't actually need to fit it underneath. If you went for the original option, if you remember what was in its place, there was a point with a surface mounted point motor, and they're quite simple. You throw the point motor, and let's cock it back. The point motor energizes, and the point will change. It's all kind of straightforward, except of course you've got this dreadful contraption then on the top of the baseboard, which you really don't want. The only time I've had to use one is when I made a mistake on the layout myself, and I couldn't put the point motor underneath because there was a timber in the way, so I had to surface mount one, and it's on the old Chadwick going into the fuel depot, so you put obviously a building over the top of it. So if you don't want a surface mounted point motor, what do? Well, naturally it must go underneath, and that gives you several options. You can, as you may have seen when I removed some of the points, you can connect Pico point motors directly to Pico points, and they go in on these four sort of twist connections here into those sleepers, and it becomes an integral part. You obviously glue the accessory switch on there, and it's quite a straightforward way of doing it. And in the past, I've liked this quite easily. Really, it's quite a good way of doing things. If it get a problem and you want to lift the point out, the whole thing comes out, or you can then undo these twist connections, if you like, and then drop the point motor down. But it's quite easy to install, and you just need to mark it out on the baseboard, drill 4 small holes at the corners of where this would be, drill the holes, and then just zing a jigsaw between the holes, and then you're good to go. But if you don't want that, then needless to say, then you're going to have something else underneath, and you would either put a seat motor like this one, where you can see it on Chadwick, or you can use the traditional Hornby motor, as I mentioned, but with the accessory switch all wired in there. Or of course you could use a slow action tortoise or cobalt type point motor, and you know, change the way of changing points completely by using a more expensive sort of system, but you have the bonus then that you don't get the rapid gunfire of points changing every time you want to change a route. Either way that you're going to do it, you have to make a hole and drill through from the point into the baseboard. So what's the best way of doing that? Well, the best way that I've come across is you need to centralise the blades so it's between one side and the other, and then you need to get a pin, which I put safely to one side a moment ago. Where is it? Come on, you little darling. No, I'll get another one. If you get a track pin, take a pair of snips and cut the end off, cut the head off, like so, and then put that, as I said, put the blades into the central position, drop the track pin through the hole, and tap it into place. Like so. I'll just tap it in a little bit further with my old motorbike valve from my younger days. Okay, so there we can see it's in place. Now, I'll just pull the other pin out that I put in earlier, take that one out, and then lift the point clear of that track pin that I just put through, and pull the point away. And we're left with the track pin, and you can see the hole that it's made. Now all you need to do is mark where it is and then drill through into the bottom of the baseboard, making sure there's nothing in the way. Depending on the type of point you're going to fit, the point motor you're going to fit, depends on the size of hole that you need to drill. So if you there may be a different size from your seep, from your Pico, and from your Cobalt, or from your Tortoise. So you need to look those up. You've got the centre where the hole needs to be, and then drill that size hole. So you can see the pin marking out where the hole's required, and if I just put some marks to show me where to drill, and then hopefully you can see those. Yeah. Now for Pico point motors, it's a 10mm drill, and I tend to use the spade ones. When you drilled in, they do make a little bit of mess of the cork. It seems to be a large hole, but it really isn't. You'll be surprised how small it is once you get the point on top. But you could always put a couple of pieces of very, very thin card or paper to stop when you're ballasting, to stop the ballast dropping through the gap. And if you're going to do slow action points such as the Tortoise, I believe it's in old money a 1/4 inch drill, which is I think is a 6.5mm drill, and that's what I'm going to use today. See if you can see that. I'm going to zoom back a little bit. Of course, the first thing to do is check that there is nothing underneath the board that you're going to drill into, which I have done. Am I good to go? Yep. And there we go. And if I drop the off of the point back on again, hopefully that should be in the centre of the blades. And it appears to be. Is that gone in again? Yep. All looks good. So where do we go from there? Well, obviously the way the layout's structured, it's to go. Well, this one here is the next fast line that will run straight through the station. This one here will be the passenger line that goes alongside the platform. So that'll give me the 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And then finally there's another line that goes around the back. So that's kind of what happens next, is we put another left hand in there, and then so there's your fast line, and there's the one that goes into the station platform, and there's the one I mentioned before that might be a kind of a DMU line that might run into a kind of a dead end. So there's the next point to do, and I also need to modify these points so that they've got their droppers on them, and I've connected up a cable to their frogs. So here we are to do some soldering, and I've turned the board right around the other way, so it's 180 degrees. You're now looking at the outside of the board. You can see the soldering iron is over there on the left hand side, and I bought that from Maplin's, and a lovely little soldering iron for about 12 quid. With Maplin's closing, I mean, I suggest you might want to get down there and get one of those quite quickly. It's done me proud over the last few years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify these 2 points here. I'm just going to solder on the frogs and do the dropper cables, and also show you how I do the soldering of the dropper wires on standard rails. So I'll just remove this piece of rail here where I pinned it temporarily with a couple of small pins, and then all I do is cut into the webbing underneath and put the droppers on the rails underneath, so you don't see any droppers on the side of the rails themselves. So the stuff I've got on the table for this soldering is, I've obviously got that Maplin soldering iron with a dampened sponge. I've got some flux, some lead-free solder, which I also got from Maplin's, pair of pliers, some red and green cable from Rapid, and some green cable for the frogs. So I shall tackle these frogs first. These are the frogs off the old points that I've taken out, and what I want to do is just replace these cables with the green cables that I tend to prefer, because it's the way I do my wiring. So I've got some kind of a wiring strategy using the same colour cables. For stripping back cables, I tend to use a pair of these cheap, well not cheap, but these really reasonably cheap Stanley wire strippers. They've got a knurled knob. They've got a knurled knob on, so you can do that. So you can see what's going on, and if you get the distance right by adjusting the screw, then you can simply pull it out. And what you need to do is just check inside there to make sure there's no cable, because if there is cable in there, then obviously the pliers, the cutting area is sort of too tight, so you need to kind of back it off, which is a piece of cake really. So all I then do, pop it in the flux, with the soldering iron and tin the cable. It took me a good few months really to figure out soldering. I was getting through tip after tip, and what I wasn't doing was going back into the flux and then back onto the solder, and to re-tin the tip of the soldering iron prior to putting it away. I just put it very nice and clean, and couldn't understand why I was getting through so many tips, but became obvious once I did a bit more research on YouTube what I was doing wrong. So that's that one soldered back onto there, and hopefully that should be okay by giving it a good tug, and we're good to go. I won't repeat it on the other ones. I mean, it's quite straightforward how you do those. And I cut these at normally about 14 inches, which might seem excessive because it's no distance at all from the frog to where the point motors goes, but invariably on the underside of the board it will be pinned down, so just cut them a bit on the long side to save the embarrassment later on. So now we come to these points, and to modify these, if I can just zoom you in a little closer. And while I remember, I've written myself a little note here that the red rail is on the inside, so all these ones are red and the outside ones are black. So hopefully I won't forget. And now looking at this point, hopefully you can see that this one has been modified. So it's been cut across here, and those two links have been removed, and a shorting cable has been placed across there to give better conductivity right through. When I start from scratch, I don't do it just like that. What I do is get the cable that feeds the point, and I solder it across those two and then down into the layout, which I'll show you in a second. So this is one of the old points that I removed from the layout earlier, and then hopefully you can see on there that this link is intact, and there's the bare track in which I'll put the cable on. So all you do is quite simple, is snip the link out, and try to cut it right back so there's no way that it can sort of join up at a later date. So you want to make, not just snip through it, but remove part of the cable. That's that one. I'll put it back into the camera for you. Then hopefully you can see that the links have been removed, and there's no way that they can sort of touch because part of the section's been removed. That's quite straightforward. Right, so with those removed, now what we need to do is put a cable across here and bring that cable down onto the layout. The cable I use is the readily available rapid cable. You'll find that at all the model railway shows and exhibitions and that kind of thing. So having adjusted these Stanley strippers, you just go in about sort of 3/4 of an inch, strip out the cable. Again, just check you got it right, that there's no cable left in the empty sleeve. Twist him up into the flux, and then tin the cable. Obviously you must make sure that this area is clean underneath this webbing, and make sure that is nice and clean and shiny, so that the solder would adhere to it. and remembering that this rail is going to be the closest one to me, so it needs to be the red. So we're going to do it the right way around, and if I can move that so you can see better, and now we're going to work out how long I want this to be. So now I can snip off a little bit of this, the excess. So that'll go there and then disappear straight down, so that looks good. So a bit more solder, and I wonder if we can tin those a little bit, like that. And remembering to hold this still. Okay, just place it on top. Now hopefully that cable shouldn't pull away. So we've got the link straight across the two tracks, and we haven't got, excuse my phone, what we haven't got is an unsightly wire that's soldered onto the side of the track. So that's quite straightforward. I won't show you how to do every one of these, they're all exactly the same. So now I want a black one on there, another green frog cable coming off here, and the same for every point, so it's all kind of straightforward. But make sure afterwards that you put a meter over it to make sure you've got good continuity between the outside rail and the switch rail, or I can't remember the switch rail or the stock rail, whatever these are called. But anyway, to make sure you've got good continuity between those. The continuity between the frog and this blade here will be taken care of underneath. So the frog will switch the polarity of that, but you need to ensure that you've got continuity between these two rails and between those two rails, which is the point of cutting those and making sure this all works. Also, and the other thing is, of course, by cutting those and not putting that link, by cutting, if you chose not to cut those, then the reverse polarity comes down the other track, which is the main reason behind doing it in the first place. It makes the points far more efficient rather than just relying on continuity from the blade onto the main rail. So the next thing is I want to put a pair of droppers on this little bit of track. So what I tend to do with these is I go underneath and I cut out some of the webbing, which is obviously straightforward. And again, the purpose of doing this is again so you don't have the soldering, the cable that's soldered onto the side of the rail showing, so that the cable is connected again to the underside of the track. I think it's all these little differences that make your layout sort of on a bit more outstanding, to be perfectly honest. So there we are, all good to go. So once again, I shall get a little bit of cable. Not that piece because that's connected to that point. If you think soldering's a black art, it really isn't. It just takes a little bit of time, and as you go wrong with your soldering, it's to figure out what you've done wrong. And normally it's to do with temperature, or it's to do with the fact that you haven't really tinned your surfaces properly in the first place. It is, of course, well, I found it quite difficult to find the right kind of solder and the right kind of flux, which just, and when you've got those sorted, the job becomes so much easier. But it just seems to take a long while to get those things sorted. I don't need that to be quite as long, so I'll cut that back a little bit. And now I shall just tin that bit of track. and coming in. Give it a tug, and again pulling it down like that, and then once this thing is ballasted you shouldn't be able to see that at all. So that just about wraps this video up. What I've got left to do now is on the existing track, on each individual piece of rail, is to solder on the droppers that will come down then and go onto the main bus, and obviously to connect up all the points and their droppers onto that bus as well. And it's the bus that will be the feature of the next video, which hopefully should come out next Friday. In the meantime, if you're watching this on a computer or the YouTube app, then there'll be a video here you can watch, or another one just here, and don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you at the next video. Take care, thanks, bye-bye.